Hi, we are Relational Experts. Poppy and Geoff Spencer here with you today on our 10th podcast. That's hard to believe. Where we begin a new month with a theme of springing forward. Yes, it's that time of year, friends. That time when daylight savings kind of sneaks up on us and this coming weekend, and we will move our clocks forward and we lose an hour.
Yeah, but I don't think of it that way. I'm an optimist.
I know. I'm just kind of having fun with you there. And it got us to thinking, so how do we spring forward in our relationships? What prevents us from doing so? In today's podcast, we will examine the one word that has different meanings. That word is projection.
Like it. Last week we reviewed the Oscars, the mistakes, and the blameless people who step forward just because, namely Jimmy Kimmel. Since then, two people at that PricewaterhouseCoopers have been assigned to other work within the company. They will not be attending future Academy Awards.
They're done with that job.
And this got us to thinking, too, that a few days ago we were return guests on the Ed Till Show, and Ed asked us a really good question. How does what happened at the Oscars, the big flub, influence our younger generations today, namely our kids? What lessons can be learned? And we said, well, the guys at the Price Waterhouse, were working. They were not there to grab a picture with Emma Stone or tweet that they were standing next to her
Which they were doing, by the way, folks, in case you didn't know that.
Yeah, when all chaos was breaking loose. They were there for one purpose, to deliver the appropriate envelope to the appropriate person at the appropriate time. That's it. So basically, the lesson learned is for our younger generation, if you're on the job, you're on the job, period.
Right. Stay focused.
Yeah.
In our last week's podcast was titled Stop, Drop, and Roll. We talked about how we can approach our communication with a pause and stop and don't be overly reactive and be too quick to say things. Drop out of conflict and roll with the goal of reaching for a better thought, a better feeling, or a better action. So for springing forward, we thought of several tips we can offer you as you interact with those you love and with whom you work. The word projection might give you multiple associations. There's a projection for images on a movie screen, speaking of movies. Projection can be a forecast, an outlook, a desired goal, an estimate, or an expectation.
Projection and spring forward, like in business, we project sales. Typically, many businesses project their figures toward the upside, right? They're positive, they're optimistic. Well, we can do the same thing. We project our goals, we spring forward with those projections, and we do other things with projections. And this is kind of like the downside of it. We project assumptions and snap judgments. We tend to make split-second decisions with limited information, filling in the stories, projecting what we think someone else's thoughts and feelings and actions are, according to our projected lens.
You mean filling in the blanks?
Yes, exactly.
This is another thing we've written about in the past and in our book, filling in the blanks, when Jeffrey was looking all grumpy and you thought I didn't love you anymore. It was just me being grumpy. That's all it was. Right. Tired and grumpy.
Yes. And we all have that, right? So we project exactly how others perceive us according to how we perceive ourselves in that moment. So how can we get around this projection thing so we can have the interactions and the relationships that are open, loving, accepting?
Well, we can stop some of this negative projecting, stop our thoughts and judgments from springing forward. Oh, we're so clever with the way we use these things. I recall a time with a client who, in the midst of her divorce, was repeatedly in a fearful state. And it was just like a dark film over everything this person was doing. Her fear became pervasive with almost all of her interactions with others. She projected what seemed like, irrational fears onto all of her decision-making. Now, one low point, when threatened with the thought of her own doing, by the way, that she might not see her kids as often as she was expected or she felt she needed to be. She shared with us on the coaching call that she didn't care about receiving any money. I don't care about the money. She just wanted her kids. Which, of course, we were alarmed to hear that. We reframed all of her fear-based comments with a step-by-step process so she could figuratively see her way out of the dark thoughts that haunted her. And she did ultimately get divorced, and she shares equal time with her kids. And we helped her frame the relationship with her ex, and they now work together very well for the best interests of the two children.
Yeah, that was a really scary. That was a particularly scary time with her, but we worked through it really well. And as coaches, we don't make judgments. We're not attached to the outcome. But in this particular,
it's an emotionally charged time, and
right.
it does bring up a lot of irrational thoughts based on fears. And it was our job to really help her kind of reframe and recircle back to what the real desires that she wanted, and that most of them could be had if she just looked beyond just some of the fear.
Right. And we were able to recognize that. We could see it in her face that it was just merely fear that was making those decisions that weren't in the. See, I was teaching a class, psychology of marketing, in the classroom with one of my students. And there were 30 students in the class. And at one particular time, and I'm usually pretty upbeat and optimistic and pretty approachable. But I remember this one time, and all my students were like favorite students. But this one particular time, I was giving an assignment that had multiple components to it. And I wanted to make sure that I got through them all, as I was, scanning the classroom of faces. This is 8:30 in the morning too. So, I mean, by the time they're done, they're pretty fried anyway. But I was scanning the classroom. I wanted to make sure in my own head that I didn't leave anything out for their assignments, even though it was on the syllabus. And after class, a young student approached me and she said, "You were totally looking at me." And I said, "Excuse me?" And she said, "Well, I could tell that you were angry when you said if any of the assignments are late, that there'd be a deduction in the grade, and you looked right at me. And I've always turned in my work on time. I've never been late, and I have an A going in this course." And I said, "Well, yes, of course you have." I said, I promise I wasn't looking at you." She said, "Well, you didn't smile." And that was really kind of a note to self. I felt very, sorry. I was apologetic. I was like, "Oh my gosh, no, not at all." I said in my own mind, I was trying to capture everything that I needed to say without like reading it off a syllabus, trying to be more personal and interactive with the class. But she read my facial expression as serious. That translated to her as angry. And she started to cry a little bit. And I was like, "Have you gotten a lot of sleep in the last few days?" And she said, "No, I've been up, So those kinds of things really, really, cloud our judgments and our projections. She projected that back onto me. Anyway, but it was also really helpful to me, so that I make sure that even if I'm covering a serious topic, that I still show some animation, some lightness on my face, so people don't think that I might be angry at them.
They just expect you to smile all the time. You have such a beautiful smile. On this radio interview we had a few days ago, we were asked by the host, Ed Till, if we as adults have projected negative influence on our children, especially around relationships and commitment. There's been some, as we all know, very challenging numbers on divorce rates, and it just always seems to get worse, not better. And and there's so much with some of the younger folks too. The hooking up is so easy with the social technologies now they have of Tinder and Bumble. Sometimes we've heard anecdotal things of 2 and 3 hookups in a night, almost like it was some sort of a contest. And the guys can be that way sometimes. They always want to try to act like,
and the women too.
Yeah, I guess
they both do it. So it's a really kind of a curious time that we're living in.
And the technology seems to make it a little just too easy as well,
right.
And something Poppy and I have talked a lot about. This is, are people being too easy about these things? Are they being too just giving themselves away far too easily and not being more selective?
And it's not even giving away as much as the superficiality of the whole thing is really the opposite of what you do to sort of grow toward commitment. It's hard to do that.
I know Ed asked us if committed love is doomed, basically, and we did some informal research, and after with some discussion with a few millennials, and we posed that kind of question to them, and we've, I guess the good news is we've heard many millennials say, "I'm not like some of my peers." So are just a few millennials who are getting the limelight spoiling the image for the rest of them? Well, I guess we'll just see. Time will tell.
You know what? And if you have some thoughts on this, we would love it. If you'd go to our website, relationalexperts.com, and under the Contact Us area, write in, send us a little email, send us a couple of notes, thoughts on this to weigh in on this, especially if you're a millennial or a Gen X or anybody, even a young person. I mean, we'd really love to know. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
We also talked about blame with Ed and, the idea of, can we blame somebody for these things? One of the greatest projections we often do is blaming. When we don't want to be accountable to ourselves, we project blame on others or on something else. And I know this is something I was sharing with Poppy the other day when I was very active sailing and competing in sailing races. I always took personal responsibility if anything didn't go well, if I didn't do well. If something on the boat wasn't working well, something broke, something failed, well, it was my fault for not thinking ahead on that and springing forward in my thoughts to properly prepare to check all these different things,
your equipment,
to replace equipment.
Right.
And also, the same thing goes for the person sailing with me. Often I didn't have the opportunity to groom a crew as much as I would like to. And I mean, it's obvious to be competing with somebody else who was a two-man boat for the most part. And I didn't often have the chance to select carefully. I had to just grab somebody to go with me. And it wasn't that person's fault if they didn't have the proper training. If I didn't properly plan, if I didn't take the extra steps to train them and teach them and get them very comfortable with everything, that's on me. That's not on them. So you have to be personally accountable. You just can't shift the blame and say, well, I had a crew that wasn't very good. That's still my fault.
Right. And you know what? I had never sailed before. And when Geoff and I got back together, I was the crew on the boat. Oh my gosh. I was terrified. So thank God he felt the way he did, because I would have had a lot of blame cast upon me, I'm sure.
Well, I was also, I tried very hard to make sure
But you were in love, so it didn't
I was
matter.
in love, so I didn't
didn't matter.
But didn't make the hard things happen. I didn't even use that challenging third sail, the spinnaker, where usually a lot of things can go wrong.
Well, and see, now that's an act of love. That's for another podcast someday, but we'll talk about the love languages at some point. And it's like what we said at the Oscars last week. The responsible parties didn't step up in time. If you recall that momentary lapse where everything, it was like sort of like a silent, slow motion, like quicksandy kind of chaos. That was a long 3 minutes before someone stepped up. And finally, the producer of La La Land, who projected his frustration on those millions of viewers, both present and virtual. So it's really human nature for us to project. And it also takes literally, and I want you to think about this, 0.8 seconds to stop ourselves from projecting. I mean, think of all the times that we've projected our stuff, our negative stuff especially, onto someone else or even onto ourselves. And if we had just taken less than a second to pause, we could have circumvented all of that. It's really, it's amazing. So in working with our clients, we help them with projectum. We help them make, we help them when they start to make weakly informed assumptions. And so many times we don't have all the information, and that's where we get into trouble. Even the littlest things count as projections. The other day, Geoff and I were at the health club, we're working out, and a woman came and paused near us. She was kind of looking around. It was right before the hour. And the trainer arrived, and Geoff and I both greeted him. He's our trainer too. And the woman's smile faded, and with her her head sort of like jutted back and forth. And she sort of said in an irritated tone, like, what, are we going to have a 3-way training session now? And we said, no, we're just saying hello. We're just being polite and saying hello to our trainer that we adore. And
this was one of these fill in the blanks things,
she just made an assumption that her time was going to be like cut in third, or that she wasn't going to. And it was just like, no. And you could see like this relief come over her face, but it was like, what if she had just paused for a second, Anyway.
Okay, so here is a start of 3 things we can do right now to stop projecting. Like Poppy mentioned, it really takes less than 1 second to stop a thought from careening ahead into a projection. What if we paused and replaced that thought with this one? Now, do I have all the information I need at this very moment in time to comment or communicate? So many times we don't use all of our senses to inform us. Distractions filter in, and we make snap judgments.
Okay, I think you should repeat that one. Do I have? Repeat.
Okay, do I have all the information I need at this moment to comment or communicate?
Now, that obviously took a little bit more than 1 second, but boy, would it save you a whole lot of heartache and trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, do a systems diagnostics check. Scan your thoughts and feelings. Am I tired? Do I have low energy?
I just had one of these flashbacks to the.
I know what he's going to say.
Search your feelings, Luke. That's one of those things that we talk about. I used to have a friend. I still have the friend, but we used to go skiing together years ago in the Sierras and high altitudes and very dry environments. And he used to laugh at me at the end of the day if I was getting grumpy. He'd say, you always get all bitchy when you get dehydrated. Because you get dehydrated very easily out there. So it's always important to kind of check ourselves how we're feeling. Am I just tired? Am I just... I forgot to eat lunch, or I haven't eaten in a while, whatever it is. Those things can absolutely affect our attitudes, our moods, and try not to let those things, overtake them.
Yeah. And also, I mean, we had this the other day. We were making a couple of calls on prospective clients that we're going to work with, hopefully. And in one situation, we entered into a place of worship, which is, I had an expectation, talk about projecting, but I projected my assumption that that is a safe and welcoming place. Well, the person that came through, the person that greeted us at the reception was anything but warm and inviting. She was like, what are you representing? Why are you here? It was kind of this like, ooh, Nurse Ratched kind of a thing. It was pretty scary. So we didn't, we left feeling a little bit, we just shook it off though. It's like, you don't know. This reminds me of the Stephen Covey, who was the wonderful author of 7 Habits for Highly Successful People, whatever it was. And Stephen Covey told the time, this is about 15, 20 years ago, he was riding on a subway in New York, and it was early on a Sunday morning, about 9 o'clock, and a man got on with 3 kids, and they were kind of running around and climbing on the seats and disrupting the passengers and loud. And Stephen Covey looked at the other passengers, and they all were kind of like shaking their head and rolling their eyes. And finally, one of them went up to the father, and he said, hey man, can't you get your kids under control here? This is getting out of hand. And Stephen Covey, the father looked up, and he was like in a daze. And he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Yeah, I can do that." He said, "We just left the hospital. Their mother just died." Oh my gosh. Everybody talk about projections, right? Oh, and making assumptions. And of course, they all immediately felt horrible. And, let the kids run, and, we totally understand. But it was one of those things, like, we don't have all the information. Mm-hmm. So, and sometimes we ask, is my mind too occupied with other things to give appropriate feedback in this situation? And like Geoff said, we find ourselves, we're tired. We have a client who doesn't like to have sessions after work because she wants to be really present. So we have our sessions early in the morning when she's alert and rested. And obviously, if you're sick with that crummy flu going around, it's gonna derail you.
That'll take it out of anybody. Yeah, and just general stress and fatigue take their toll. Here on the Gulf Coast of Florida, there's good news and bad news for our city. Sarasota was voted the top city in Florida to live, and we attract so many visitors and snowbirds, especially this time of year. We're anxious for to get a little bit later in the springtime when they start to head back to the north. The only problem is the road infrastructure, and a lot of things here just can't accommodate all these people effectively. So we have to adjust and add, often 20 to 30 minutes on our drive time to make sure we can get to where we want to get to. And the stress of being late can absolutely cloud your perceptions and disrupt your mood for the rest of the day. I know very conscious of being on time. And so I know Poppy will all look at me and I'll be pacing around the
Geoff is
hallway.
he's like the border collie, right? He like herds me, H-E-R-D. He herds me into the, like, oh, you do. And I'm like, I'm coming. So I've been really good.
Don't reach for that next piece of jewelry. Stay away from the makeup counter. On your way, get to the car.
Step away from the lipstick.
Step away from the lipstick.
Oh, but I'm never going to step away from the lipstick. So, you know what? That is funny.
There's a good kind of projection we can do too, folks.
Finally,
yeah, good things. This is when we intentionally project goals and like sales estimates for the year, like I used to do in my business. We can create 1, 3, and 5 year plans.
We still do this in our business.
We still do it. Yes, absolutely. These steps are needed in a sales environment to make quotas. And I know our compensation was often based on sales performance, bonuses based on overachievement. But these successes always started with one thing. You project a goal.
Right. Yeah, you have to start there. So that's the other thing. Vision boards are another way to project your goals and dreams. And oh my gosh, as you're listening to this, we're on our way to our master coach, Jack Canfield's home in Santa Barbara, California, where we will definitely project our goals. One of our big, bold goals is to work with as many people as possible, as many organizations, to bring about heart-healthy communication. Visualization,
alone is great, but we project in our minds. Meditation helps bring forward those desires we all experience to bring about deeper purpose and meaning into our lives. So as you're listening, what kind of projections do you have?
And think about that. We'd love to hear from you. Next week, we look forward to sharing the gems from our mastermind group at Jack Canfield's home. And so we ask you to please write to us or comment on relationalexperts.com. Let us know your thoughts for today's podcast or any of the other past ones. Do you have any questions? Are there anything that we shared with you that you'd like fleshed out a little bit more, maybe explained more, clarified? Or if you have a topic idea, oh my gosh, we'd love to hear that. We had somebody approach us not too long ago and they said, hey, I want to be on your podcast. And we're gearing up. We're already taking, we have a couple people signed up to be guests. If you'd like to be a guest, we'd love to have you. So next week, we're going to surprise you with our topic for our Spring Forward series. Maybe you'll write to us and let us know what your burning goal you have is. So thanks for listening.
Yep, we're projecting all good thoughts and feelings to you. Have a great week.
Bye.